I think it'll be good.
That'll be great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Steve Stein, and I'm the host of the Street Smart Wisdom Podcast. This is brought to you by Wisdom Feed, Wisdom Feed Plus. It's a new community and platform we've been building. And today I'm wearing the Street Smart Wisdom Podcast hat. So we'd like to welcome Dr. Ido Cohen. And the topic today is understanding shadow work in depth
Mm.
psychology. Welcome, Ido. Did I pronounce that okay? Or
You're pronouncing it great. Thank you, Steve. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
oh no, it's great to have you. I'm not uh, so familiar with your work. The things I've seen are great, and you're well recommended. So I'm so glad to have you here. And
Mhm.
so tell us a little bit about the kind of work you do.
Sure. I am a clinical psychologist. I practice out of the Bay Area. I'm a graduate of California Institute of Integral Studies. So for those who know that school, it's a very eclectic psychology school based in San Francisco that was established on the philosophy of Haridas Chundri, which and who founded integral psychology. Right, so the idea that the psyche, logical, and the spiritual are one and connected, and that to treat the whole person, you have to incorporate both. And so I come from that tradition, and then trained in the Jung Institute in San Francisco as my pre-doctoral, so definitely also influenced by Jungian work. And as part of my process for my doctoral research, I did it on the psycho-spiritual integration process of ayahuasca ceremonies, looking at that process from a Jungian perspective. So seeing how Jung's philosophy um, corresponds with psychedelic healing, psychedelic evolution, and most of all, the ongoing process of individuation and change. And I work around in the Bay with in my psychotherapy office. I work with individuals and couples and groups. I'm mostly with early childhood trauma, um, depression, low self-esteem, a lot of inner critic challenges, and dream work, and also psychospiritual development, alongside with a lot of preparation and integration work for people who engage with psychedelics either recreationally or come back from psychedelic therapy or retreats in different places in the world.
Interesting, interesting. Just had
Thank you.
a technical gremlin, so I'm just sorry about that. So, right. So, as you, how did you get started in all this?
Ooh, which one of the this? I think I was always fascinated. I remember always being curious about why people do what they do. Really, like at a very early age, I was really curious about why do people do what they do? What made you do that thing or say that sentence or and I think what I was trying to do is really trying to get to understand the inner the inner introverted process of people. And I was also a very imaginative kid. So, Dungeons and Dragons was my favorite game and really believed that there is some kind of invisible world out there somehow. And I'm Israeli. So after being in the army, I went traveling and saw people go through really profound, um, what I perceived as life altering experiences. And when they came back to their familiar habitats, everything kind of fell apart. And that really stirred up something in me, a passion in me about researching change and what makes people change, what environments are conducive to change, what are the challenges for long-term sustainable change. Um, so it was all these pieces of my child self and then that evolution that it was very clear to me that my work would be as a psychotherapist.
Interesting, phenomenal. Um, and so, and CIIS is
Hmm.
a little eclectic, and
Hmm.
uh, and was that just and did you discover Jungian or shadow work there, or were you already kind of predisposed?
No, so I discovered Jung actually a little late in my undergrad in Israel. I did my undergrad in sociology and psychology, and I remember in psychological theories we were kind of walking one by one, and oop,
No, I'm here.
um,
I'm here.
you're here, and she covered Jung. The professor covered Jung, and I was fascinated. And that started getting me kind of researching and exploring and getting everything I can read on it. And then I had the opportunity to take a course that was the child spiritual development through Harry Potter. And there was one professor was a child psychoanalyst, and the other was a Jungian analyst. And
That's a thing. Harry Potter. Say that again.
it was child psycho spiritual development through the story of Harry Potter. So we read all the books
Wow.
one by one and analyzed both the trauma that he goes through, but also the archetypes, the interpersonal dynamics. It was just fascinating to me. And I just felt that Jung's language really spoke to it was the most grounded thing I could get that really spoke to psycho spiritual development and a psychological attitude that takes both of those worlds seriously and puts them together. That you can't separate the psyche from the spirit. You can't separate the psyche emotional from spirit. Oh, it was one of the best courses I've ever taken. It was phenomenal. It's wonderful.
Wow. Harry
Hmm.
Potter and Jung. Who'd have thunk?
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, I think springs are popping out of my head just even thinking of what in God's name does Harry Potter have to do with Jung. So
Mm.
and Jung is deals with the I remember the book in college. I wasn't studying it specifically, but Man and His Symbols, you
Hmm.
know, I just remember it's like an amazing coffee table book. And every time I thumbed through it, I just like had a deep resonance with
Mm.
and I was probably only 17 or 18 at the time. So somehow I had the resonance longer than my 17 years of age. Like I was connecting
Mm.
with these
Hmm.
archetypal images and concepts
Yeah.
that I just knew that I you know, it was
Something.
unspoken, or
Yeah.
I knew that uh, there was something resonating with me that was more than
Mm.
more than surface. I could see that it was there. That there was something, and I think that was the beginning for me a little bit, also in
Mm.
terms of uh, in search of in search of you know answers to the bigger questions. I think.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, there's a man who wrote a book, great book called Encounters with the Unconscious, who had these really profound experiences as a 16-year-old that sent him into a very, I mean, he would call it a psychotic reality for a long time. And it took him about 35 years approximately where he started studying at CIS and he came across Jung. And then he started learning about archetypes, just like you were describing. And all of a sudden, he had this light bulb go off of like, oh, what I experienced was actually what he's talking about. It wasn't psychosis. It was actually an encounter with these really profound energies, these really profound images and symbols that back at the time he couldn't make sense of, if nobody around him could make sense of. And it
right, right,
touches, right? It touches what Jung called the collective unconscious, right? This part of us that's connected to something beyond words, that connected to the image, to the symbol, and resonates something deep inside of us. And it's up for us to kind of find the language, to find the bridge between image and consciousness.
And I guess that's where the depth comes in depth
Hmm.
psychology. It's a deep, uh, unconscious connection to something bigger than
Yeah,
yourself,
absolutely.
and it kind of, sets you up for a quest. It sets you up for,
Mm,
uh, but you know what? It's like, uh, I would, no judgment. I would say a majority of the world lets that go by, or never even can look at that book and just go on to the next book. And
absolutely.
and how did it, with the Harry Potter course? It just sounds interesting. Did people have revelations, like in looking? Did they go back and did you watch the movies, or was it
Oh, we they had us read and watch all the movies, and we were actually paired up, and each pair had to take a book and analyze it line by line. So, like my pair, I was one of the two people. We were in charge of the last book, of the seventh book. So I read the whole book line by line, and we were searching for how does his psychodynamics come into play when there is this archetype shows up, right? How does that relate to Jung's idea of the wise man or the shadow, right? Voldemort as the shadow, and not just that he's both the collective shadow, but also they are tied together, right? Harry Potter and Voldemort are in, they're linked, they're always linked, right? Which we can think about as a metaphor for ourselves. We are always, we can't escape our shadow, right? I actually love Peter Pan for that. If you think about it, right? Peter Pan is always chasing his shadow, trying to like reattach it, and the shadow always try to escape, right? It's like this playful, mischievous, trickstery kind of energy, right? The shadow always escapes Peter Pan, and there is something about Peter Pan that understands that he has to be connected to it. He has to
right?
be connected to the shadow.
And by definition, he can almost never catch it.
Exactly. Which,
And
there is a bigger theme, right? Which there is a whole analysis of that's the reason why Peter Pan never goes out of Never Never Land. He can't grow up because he's never attached to his shadow. He's never fully integrated. So he always stays in that kind of state, a childlike state,
he's
right? What
running from and running towards his shadow at the same time.
exactly, exactly.
And
Which
then
is what
there's,
we do a lot, right? We do it a lot. Just that beautiful
damn,
statement you said.
I'd love to stop actually. I mean, I think I would like to. I don't know.
We want to and we don't, right? It's nice that we don't have to deal with it, but we also know that if we only through dealing with it, we can have a life that's really, really in authenticity, really in integrity, and really full, a really full life.
And then I guess it ties in also with Peter Pan and the Hillman idea of puer and the puer
Exactly.
eternus. So it's really like you can never grow up if you don't deal with the shadow.
No.
And I mean, does that make sense, that statement?
Oh,
Or
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, Hillman is great in talking about, right, the puer puella complex and how that's related to um, people being stuck. Marie Louise von Franz, who's also, I mean, I'm sure you know her, Jungian analyst, right? She wrote a whole book about the puer aeternus, and she talks about the devastating path of growth for the puer, right? How basically puers have to experience the disappointment a lot to grow up, and there are really rude awakenings for puer controlled man in order to mature from being a boy to being a man, from moving out of the Peter Pan consciousness, out of the puer consciousness, into a more integrated, more mature. Um, what Hillman then plays and Jung play on the Senex, right? The wise old man, right? So the puer has to go through a lot of trials and tribulations with the shadow in order to grow up, in order to be more integrated and emerge as a man.
right. So I guess that's a kind of way to dovetail into, shadow work. Is that the essence of
Hmm.
shadow work? Is, you know, the running from and running towards your shadow? I mean, is that your whole fucking life? Excuse my French. Is that
I think it's good to be humble in front of the shadow, right? We're not
what? Say that again. What?
we need it's good to be humble, right? You don't want to be I find myself a lot there's a lot of people that are like when you want to do shadow work and they're like and you can get so lost in it that you forget to live. You're constantly looking for the things that are wounded and unintegrated. It's like, wait, but you need to also go and experience life and joy and pleasure and love and so it's good to be, in healthy I think it's for me it's about building a healthy relationship to it, right? And first we need to like think of define what is shadow, right? Shadow in the mainstream now, and I'm curious what you're going to think, Steve, is right, is mostly associated with negative experiences, right? It's the negative aspects of ourself, it's the trauma, it's the unresolved impact of trauma on us, it's the parts of us that we don't like, it's shame, it's all the things we're ashamed of. But Jung actually talked about shadow as just being anything that's out of consciousness. So, in a way, if you think about it, that takes us into a kind of a non dual understanding of shadow. Because there is also really positive things about us that are in the shadow, right? Post
What? Like
Jungians
what?
call it golden shadow. Like if I grew up in a family where my creativity, right, got ridiculed or rejected or belittled, I'm going to repress that creativity into my unconscious. And a lot of people go through that. And then 30, 40, 50 years later, something sparks out. I'm like, I remember I used to paint. I remember that. And it used to give me so much joy. So that is a positive aspect of ourself that got repressed into the shadow, right? The easy one for a lot of us is so it can be our creative aspect, it can be our sexuality, right? Religion, parents, environment do a whole number on us as far as our relationship with our sexuality. And then we have to kind of reclaim it piece by piece as we go.
And I guess you're talking about working with the shadow in a productive way, because they talk about a lot of writing, all kinds of writing is,
Hmm.
or at least for me, uh, is trying to make something good out of not necessarily a nightmare, but to kind of channel the dark into something positive. And I guess
Mm,
that's alchemical, also trying to turn it into gold.
absolutely. Hmm. Right, which is Jung's thing that there is golden shadow, there is gold.
Oh, so that's the gold. I'm not familiar with that term. The golden
Hmm.
shadow is how do you spin it? That's part of alchemy.
Well, that's the alchemy, right? So the idea is that there's two things, right? For Jung, the when you take the more painful shadow and you do what you said, alchemy with it, the idea is that through enough engagement and through conscious work, both internally and externally, it transforms itself into gold, right? So the child whose creativity has been repressed and discovers it can slowly start taking that creativity back. And then, lo and behold, I'm painting, I'm creating, which brings a lot more life force. It brings a lot more flow. It starts to change my life. That becomes the gold. And then there is what he kind of hints, but more post Jungian called like golden shadow, which is the what Hillman calls the daemon, right? The thing that we're supposed to become. Some of us call it fate. Some of us call it destiny. Hillman called it daemon, right? But it's something that's so out of our consciousness, right? So the classic ones are, the multi-billionaire who becomes a, I don't know, a kindergarten teacher, or right, these things that are those are the common ones, right? But it's these like profound changes in uh, self-identity that we
So,
didn't even know are there for us, and somehow they erupt all of a sudden.
you lost me on that one. So a billionaire who becomes a kindergarten teacher, or a kindergarten
Yeah.
teacher who becomes a billionaire.
I think the one that's more common is people who seemingly had everything and go
Okay.
through some experience and then choose something utterly different. And from the outside, a lot of us would be like, "Why would you ever do that? You were on the top of the." I'll give you an example. I just talked to a new colleague who She was a recording artist, a musician, beautiful vocalist. She's shooting videos abroad for her upcoming album. Midway through the shoots, she has this deep insight. She's like, "This is not my path." Now, if
She's
you're an
living the
artist
dream.
out
Why wouldn't it be her path?
exactly, right? And if you're an artist, if you're a singer, musician, you know that getting a record deal, that having a company pay for your videos, it's a big deal. It can be the
Totally.
beginning of a whole, but something deeper inside of her was like, this is not your path. And she totally changed direction. Now she's
Wow.
still using her voice, right? So from that, that's the idea of the golden shadow. It's this, it's integrating something that we didn't even imagine is part of who we are. It's coming into like a new level of authenticity that is so out of our idea of self.
This is like timely personally, because uh, in a past life I was a songwriter, uh,
Uh-huh.
and I'm in the middle of writing new songs for the first time in more than 20 years.
Oh wow.
So, I have pretty much an empty nest now as of the last
Hmm.
couple of months. And, so I'm working and living and all that good stuff. But, uh, and I am moving it forward. But what you just said, though, uh,
Hmm.
imagination is a theme in like a lot of these sessions that I'm doing between summits or podcasts and all these different things. Uh, Here, I'll go there anyway. What the heck? So, like, they
Great.
talk about a failure of imagination, right? With
Hmm.
9/11 and the horrific attacks in Israel.
Mm.
And then we just had an amazing, this woman, Laura Sims. She's been around a while. She's a world class storyteller. So
Mm.
we did stories of peace in times of war.
Oh
And
wow.
we had a Hebrew, she told a Hebrew story, an Arabic story, a Ukrainian story, and a Russian story.
Wow.
And it was really, really cool. But the thing that I took away from it is that in one of the stories, I'm going to butcher it badly, but the concept was, um, the animals in the stories turned into people, or the
Mm.
or the or, and then we're able to multiply and do things in the story that freed up the story, moved the plot along. But then at the end, they were animals again. But that
Mm.
imagination of imagining a better anything
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
missing, and I think is one of the things that is missing, because if you just stuck in the mundane, it's so damn bleak. How do you find any hope?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I definitely want to listen to that
Yeah, I'll get your copy.
interview. Yeah, please. Um, I remember being at a training in the institute, the Jung Institute here, and a very seasoned analyst. She said the capacity to imagine is directly linked to one's pain. And what I understood from that is that she was saying that the more we experience pain and trauma and we don't treat it, that's the key factor. If we don't treat it, it starts killing our ability to imagine. Because if you I think for me, if you think about it, there is something really brave about imagining, because it means you have to depart from your current place of reality and go somewhere else, which can be really scary, right? So I don't know what you're going to do with your songs, but I'm glad you're doing it, right? But what it to keep imagining into the songs, to keep creating them, because then maybe that songwriter is going to start having demands on Steve and be like, hey, maybe we should put a songbook out. And it's like, wait, me song put the songs out in the world? I don't know about that. That sounds a lot,
No,
right?
it's very safe not finishing a fucking song. I mean, because then you
Ex-
never.
okay, that's powerful. It's very safe, right? But
But it's
let me ask you. Can I
familiar,
ask you a
and it's a
question?
rut, and it's a shadow. So it
Okay.
does it does it, and it's like, So you said something a couple minutes ago about being fulfilled or something, or being a new version of
Mhm,
that
mhm, mhm,
that songwriter person.
mhm.
And then imagine, I what I heard is imagining myself finishing the songs, doing the songs in a way that's fulfilled, and it's not this scary,
Yep.
like, thing that, I better do it before I die and all this stuff.
Mm,
Then it's like, then you don't get out of bed in the morning.
absolutely. It's in her book. By no means I'm saying that's you, but in her book, she talks about the puer. She talks about the writer who never wrote. Right. So she said there's like a
That's
classical
Marie Louis von Franz.
in France. She talks about those men who are like, I have wrote in my head the most brilliant book,
Wow.
and 3 months later he comes back to a meeting and he's like, the book is going so well, and the friends are like, well, can we read it? It's like, no, 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 I have not written it yet, but it's written in my head. 10 years later, the book is still in his head. And I think you're naming something really important, which is it's very safe, right? So we want to ask ourselves, why is it safe to stay in a familiar pattern, knowing that it's actually against what I want to do? I want to write the song, I want to write the book, right? But not in a judgmental way, for us to kind of take, I think the most, if there is one thing that whoever is listening can take from this is, how do you take on an attitude of curiosity in face of shadow? Right? So how do I become curious? How do I'm like, you know what? I'm keep doing the same pattern. I really want to write a book and I can't bring myself to write it. What is that about? And to start and opening those doors of like, okay, what is it about? What happens when I sit in front of the computer and I want to write? What happens to my body? What memories kind of spontaneously erupt for me?
Right. So, I mean, that's good stuff. So, one of the things we like to try to do is um, is have some kind of takeaway or something that someone
Hmm.
can try to do. Now, does it- you know, are we on track talking about this stuff and shadow work and depth psychology? I guess so.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So, what is, so do you have a tip or an idea or a takeaway for someone to approach something? Let's just call it generic, like a habit that's been pervasive. You know,
Hmm.
is that a good example? Maybe you have a better one, but what could someone listening try to a new approach or something like that?
I think it's first is really coming to whatever it is you're dealing with curiosity. I think when we deal with shadow, a lot of people go into their inner judge or their inner critic. It's like, what's wrong with me? As opposed to like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? But really be curious, like really trying to understand. So understanding is right. And then you can do a whole bunch of things. You can sit down and write it. I can't write my book. Okay, great. Why can't I write it? Well, I feel like I'm not gonna be good enough. Okay, that's an interesting statement. How you keep opening up that statement. Why do I think I'm not good enough? Well, my mom always told me that I will never amount to anything, or my second grade teacher, or everything I've tried to put into the world got rejected or I'm shamed. Oh, okay. So here's another. Putting my creativity into the world feels dangerous. So the way I don't write is to stay safe. It's a safety mechanism. So now I know that my job is to work on creating safety in expression. What do I need to take the first step towards, okay, I don't need to publish the book. Maybe I can just write it. Okay, so I'm going to make a point and I'm going to sit in front of the computer. Great. How does it feel to sit in front of the computer? I'm terrified. Okay, great. Right. So the idea is to keep opening it up. You keep opening it up. And you use the information, right? What the shadow, the encounter with the shadow, as I call it, tells us to start making adjustments. So it's always there is an interior introverted part, right? We ask questions, we listen to the body, we listen to the feelings, to the associations, the images that come up. And then there is the quote unquote extroverted external part. I do something. I take a little risk. I do something small. I see what happens to me. So I sit down and just write for an hour. I wrote 3 sentences. Wonderful. That's progress. And then I sit and I reflect, like, how was that? Oh my God, after an hour, I'm sitting here, I'm sweaty and I'm full of negative thoughts and I'm shaking, or wow, actually it makes me feel good. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, right? Again, it's all information. So to bring it back, it's the idea is to build a healthy relationship with shadow.
So you're talking about kind of like a journaling process or a self dialogue and writing
Can
process?
be a journaling, it can be self-reflection, it can be it can be through painting, it can be through writing a song about how my shadow is experienced inside of me. It can be through ritual. Maybe I want to write my shadow and take it into my meditation, or go burn it in don't burn the forest, but go burn it somewhere in nature. It can be a whole bunch of things, right? Jung talked about that the whole individuation, meaning like ongoing becoming conscious process of life, has an analytical part and an artistic part, and they both have to be there at the same time always. If you're only analytical, you will only go as far. If you're only artistic, you'll only go as far. They have to collaborate.
W- w- which parts have to collaborate?
The creative artistic, so I move my body, I'm in creating art, I'm meditating, right? He did yoga, he I go hike, I right? So it's a much more out of the mind experience. And the reflective analytic, which is I reflect about my feelings, I reflect about the like you said, the patterns that keep coming back over and over. And but they have to collaborate, which if you think about it, he's kind of in a way hinting to hemispheres, right? We have a one more that's more analytic, one that's more creative. And we know that if we practice working both hemispheres and having strong expressions of both hemispheres and they work together, usually that's what brings up genius, or what creates a lot more creativity, or what creates a lot more spontaneity and aliveness in us. So he saw that principle also in nature, right? Destruction and creation. So there's always the two that have to work together.
Interesting. Purely hypothetical question. So
Oh, I
let's
love
say
that.
someone is got the song 90% done, but keeps finding purely hypothetical, but
Purely,
but keeps finding excuses to do something else, and haven't mowed the lawn in 6 years. Oh, great time to mow the lawn. Purely hypothetical. So
purely.
how do you got to use the creativity, and what could someone say to themselves or do,
Uh, just at top of my mind, two things came to mind. I would just sit with the last two lines, like with the whole song, and look at that empty space, right? The ending, and just sit and start to like feel like, okay, if I sit with it for 20 minutes, but I can only focus on this. I can't think about the lawn. I can't think about, oh wait, let me check my phone, or look, let's go on, wisdom feed and see what's. And it's like, okay, I start feeling my relationship with those last two lines.
love it.
um so right, so that's one. The other is something a little bit more playful. It's like, okay, let me write 20 versions of those two lines. I'm not committed to anyone. I'm just gonna allow myself to write 2 lines. Okay, wow, put that aside. 2 lines. Okay, put that aside. 2 lines. Right. So kind of bring a little. See what happens when I bring a little movement into that stuck place.
I, I, I love
I
that.
remember I was of recent. God, I feel bad now. I heard the poet. He's one of the really famous Celtic poets. Um, Ugh, I feel bad. I forget his name.
Okay, what was the idea?
Anyway, he was talking about sitting in this beautiful place somewhere, I don't know, Switzerland or something, and he was trying to finish a poem that he's been working on for like 3 years. And he's
Yates?
sitting.
Talking about Yates? W.B.
No,
Yates?
no, he's alive. He's
Oh,
alive.
he's still around.
He's
Okay.
very familiar. Yeah. Um,
So he's trying to finish a poem. Okay.
finish a poem, right? And he's sitting in what sounds like the most poetic, pastoral like view inside this house on the river, blah blah blah, whatever. And he can't finish the poem. It's not coming. And he goes out to. He's like, okay, I'm stuck. He sits there for hours. He's stuck. He's like, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go take a walk. I'm gonna go get my coffee. And he has this whole what would feel like a really minor experience with the person selling the coffee. And they somehow have this interaction, and that interaction frees something inside of him. And all of a sudden, the poem kind of, the last two lines kind of write themselves somehow. Right? But why do I like that story or why it's coming? Because he's engaging.
Mm-hmm.
He's engaged, right? He took his block and he went to get some coffee with it. He didn't take the block. He didn't go to get coffee to disconnect from this pesky two less lines. He's like, okay, I'm gonna take them with me to go get some coffee and see what happens.
I like it. That's great.
Yeah.
That's cool. And then just circling back personally, you mentioned Marie Louise von Franz talks about
Mhm.
the guy at the dinner party. I'm working on a book. Hey, so I've been that guy. I'm sorry.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm dealing with it myself. I'm writing a
No,
book, and
no,
I can
but
see
what does
that.
she have to say about it?
Well, she calls it. She says that deep inside, what's there is what she called the trembling child.
Mm,
That there is somewhere in there a child archetype that is trembling with the idea of taking his book, which is right when we create something, there is part of us that's in that creation, right? We know that from the artist's archetype, right? The tormented artist that paints 1,000 paintings but doesn't put them out on a gallery because they're afraid of being criticized or judged or they judge it themselves, right? So she talks about the trend and how that we need to the trembling child needs to find safety and strength to go into the world and actually be hurt, right? Because not everyone is gonna like my book. Some people even like say really bad things about it. Some people might like it. Some people will like it. And that there is something about right the child's need to grow in through its growing pains, to use that as growing pains in order to evolve and mature. And then your creativity starts to kind of unhook itself from all those fears of the child, right? That's why she talks about the importance of being disappointed. She really has this beautiful passage about how being disappointed is crucial for growth because it allows you to grieve all these old, like younger parts of you that are still searching for um, unconditional positive regard, unconditional acceptance, unconditional love, and even this much more younger fantasy about living in a world without pain. And the puer doesn't work those things out. It
right.
just lives inside of that.
And then giving a trophy for coming in last place,
Exactly.
you never get to experience,
No,
reality.
exactly. But it's such a beautiful twist what you just said, right? To see how experiencing disappointment is actually in service of growth as opposed to what a lot of us think right now where there is a whole movement in culture that it's suppressing growth. Don't be disappointed, right? So everybody gets a trophy. But what are we trying to do? We're trying to protect children from natural feelings.
And maybe the flip side is a tiger mom who's like, 24 hours a day, you don't
You're
stop,
bad.
you can't, right?
Hmm.
Wow. So okay, got it. So if we wanted to circle back with the shadow work and depth psychology,
Hmm.
anything more broadly to as we start to finish up?
Yeah, I think there's two things that feel important. I don't want it to. I hope whoever's going to listen, I don't want it to hear like we're minimizing also shadow that comes from either collective or personal trauma, right?
Hmm.
When you've been hurt by life and people in a profound way, shadow can be very persistent, and it's not as easy to build a relationship with it. Sometimes we have to not be in relationship to it in order to survive for a while. And I think it's a very timely conversation for us, and I think you kind of pointed it, Steve. Right, we are in a time of a lot of collective shadow. Right, we're dealing with events and energies of death and power and helplessness and um, divisiveness. And how do we also, right, a lot of our personal um, dealing is with the collective, right? So it's also when we think about shadow, is how do we think about it in the context of my relationship with the larger environment that I live in, the larger community that I belong to. You're muted.
And the collective unconscious and all the collective trauma we're all kind of going through from you know waves and waves of
Absolutely.
trauma. So
Absolutely.
that collective unconscious, that collective trauma does tie into the whole shadow.
Absolutely. You know, Hillman said it so beautifully. I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but he has a quote. He says, "We are much more impacted by invisible forces than we care to believe." And I think he was talking both about archetypes, but also the collective, right?
Say that again.
We are much more impacted by invisible forces than we care to believe. That we think we run the show, but actually the show runs us for the most part until we make it conscious.
We think we run the show, but the show runs us until
We
we.
make it conscious. You know, we're in a holiday season, right? In everywhere that celebrates Thanksgiving, Christmas, right? I don't know if you've ever had, but if now when you go walking down any busy street, the urge to shop for something usually arises for people pretty early on. Why? Because you're bombarded with messages about the holiday of giving, all the discounts, all it's all right. So this is the collective energy of capitalism, of whatever holiday, where we can analyze holiday spirits, slowly funneling into our. But I just came to get ice cream, and all before I know it, I'm like 4 bags in my hands with gifts for myself and people that I didn't even think about it, like buying. Right, so that's like a playful experiment. But it's like, yeah, people who are dreaming dreams of wars but are not in war, where are these dreams coming from when there are a lot like big wars happening in the world right now? How why would I dream about that?
So, not that there's any way to summarize, but in terms of the shadow coming to terms with it, or the only way to let it stop running the show is to kind of come to turn on the light or come to terms with it in some way
Creating a healthy relationship. It's all about the relationship
with yourself, with the shadow, with
with
challenge.
yourself and the shadow. If I don't know myself, it's going to be really hard for me to discern self versus shadow.
Got it. Got it. Our friend Mikey Brackett before commented the master and his emissary.
Emissary. Yeah, I saw that.
Cool.
Hmm.
Um, so how can people find you?
Easiest to find me is either through my Instagram, which is Dr. Ido Cohen, or through my email, which is Ido Cohen, PSYCH at gmail.com.
Excellent, excellent. So this was great.
Thank you.
Um,
I hope to read your songs soon.
yeah, you know what? I have two new tools to
Uh-huh.
actually finish the damn bleeping song. Now, I've got, and the puer, of course, I rather start three new songs.
Absolutely.
Let
Absolutely.
me start 100. It's a symphony of songs, and you never finish one. God, I get it.
Mm.
I get it. All right. So, um, I think so. Thank you,
Thank
Ido
you for
Cohen.
having me, Steve. This was
That
great.
that 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 was excellent. All right. So we'll see you
Mm.
next time.
Okay. Thank you.